Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie, and this is
Becky.
And I am Matt.
And today we're going to be presenting the SQ3R strategy of reading. So our agenda for this presentation is, first we will do an overview of this specific reading strategy. Then we will introduce our chosen reading, which is The Banking Concept of Education by Paulo Freire. Third, we'll look at the SQ3R method in practice. We will model how we use this strategy to understand the reading. And this was a really dense reading, so we really did need this reading strategy to get us from point A to point B. And at the end, we'll close with some practical strategies for using the SQ3R method and different options for differentiation, with the hope that you can take what you learn in our video and apply it to your own classrooms. Loading.
Why is it like this?
Take this moment to wonder, what does SQ3R stand for? Activate your background knowledge as to what these symbols could possibly mean.
Hey, there we go. So just to introduce it, this strategy was first talked about by Francis P. Robinson in 1946, pretty old. It's designed to help students develop high-level study skills and make them better readers, more efficient readers. And it engages reading, studying, and memory improvement. Just a quick overview, we'll talk about it in more depth in just a bit. The first S stands for survey, it's first stage. Then we go on to question, and the 3 R's are then to read, recite, and then review.
Cool. So the reading that we chose is definitely a graduate level text. It's a chapter from Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And we chose this because it's dense, it's highly theoretical, it's very jargony. He's really influenced by Marx and Frantz Fanon, and so it's useful to have an active strategy when you're moving through a text like this to unpack its meaning. Just some context, Freire was a Brazilian educator and theorist and published Pedagogy of the Oppressed in 1970. And it's been highly influential in critical pedagogy circles and proposes a new relationship between students, teachers, and society. So you all should read this as well.
It's so good, you guys. Okay, so the first step is going to be to survey. Spoiler alert, the first step is survey. And I think this is the same way a lot of reading strategies start. You want to take a look at what you're reading from beginning to end and look for any major features in the text that will give you a concept of where you're going. And this activates your background knowledge, sees if you get any clues about what this reading is about. So you briefly scan the text looking for big ideas that the author left for the reader. This includes titles and headings of sections, bold, italic, or underlined type, reading the summary or abstract, and looking at any graphics embedded in the text. And with our text, we didn't have any images, we didn't have any graphics, we just had like 12 pages of straight words. I think there was a quote or two in there, but there wasn't a lot of text features for us to go off of. However, just reading the title, The Banking Concept of Education, that's already gonna activate background knowledge. And so this step will give you what you need to start to form an idea about what the text will be about. So we knew we were going to be reading about a specific model of education that had something to do with banking.
The next step is question. You're going to use what you did and learned about in your survey and activate your background knowledge. Again, put them together and try to think of some questions that the author would try to answer with this text. Also, you can think about what are you hoping to learn from the text? Usually in every sort of subsection of the text, if it's broken off into sections, try to think of a few questions that you think will be answered in that text, right? And so this really is going to help you like build a guide for when you're reading, right? What are you trying to get out of it? So it's going to help you sort of engage with the text more and really actively seek out answers, right? It's going to interest you more because you're actually into the text a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah.
So what questions did we come up with, Matt?
Well, the first one we did, and this is all true, not post reading the text.
Mm-hmm.
We came up with, how is banking related to education? That was based on skimming, seeing banking and education together. Who is Paulo Freire? And what informs his perspective? Also based on skimming. In this model, what is the bank in education and what is the currency? Based on skimming, I think those probably popped up somewhere. How is the banking model of education related to the factory model of education? So we're using some prior knowledge of the factory model of education and what he just said, learned the banking concept. Will this be a critique or a praise of the current model of education? Okay, so based on prior knowledge, what does he think he's going to talk about? Is this a problem for everyone or just the oppressed? Nice. Why does the banking model exist? And what solutions does he see? Those were our questions.
So the third step is to actually read it. So using these prior steps that you've done of surveying and questioning, now is the time to actually engage with the text and read those with the questions in mind as you actively search for answers. So another strategy for this process is to come up with some additional questions as you go along and actually engage with the text as you read it. And so the whole strategy is meant to keep you interacting with the text, being more active, as you'll be able to more likely recall the knowledge in the future. So this step will help you identify critical information within the text.
Step 4 is recite. And this is when you recite key concepts from the reading. So you can have this dialogue in your head, or you can have it out loud. This is where you're paraphrasing critical information that you've come across. If you say it in your own words, it's more likely that your brain will hang on to it. And you're also taking notes in a variety of word or image-based note-taking skills. So this is the step that really transforms reading into actually learning. And here are some examples of the way that our group has recited some of the main takeaways from this article. So what I honed in on was the banking model versus problem-posing education. So you can see the image on the left. This is an image of the banking model of education. And this really captures the spirit of what the author is describing. You see a teacher pouring knowledge into the head of a child with the cold precision of a gas station attendant. And in the second image, you see a teacher posing a question, which digits are missing, and then all the answers from the students start with, I think. So I think this, I think that, I think this. So already you're getting a sense of what these two education models are about. While taking notes during this stage, I tried to really boil down the main differences between these two styles. So the banking model mystifies reality, whereas the problem posing model demystifies reality. And so by this, I mean, truth is like it's something that some people have and other people don't. Whereas the problem posing model, it's a process. It's something to to be found. Second, knowledge is deposited from the knowing to the ignorant. That's in the banking model, versus knowledge being a process of critical perception. Third, students are the objects of assistance versus students as critical thinkers. So you can already start to see how these are like opposite models. In the banking model, dialogue is resisted, and in the problem posing model, dialogue is promoted. Finally, the banking model inhibits creativity and it supports immobility. Whereas with the problem posing model, it stimulates reflection and acknowledges history. So the problem posing model acknowledges people in a history that's in process, whereas the banking model has it more fixed, has truths as a more fixed concept. So yeah, I was able to take these two big concepts and boil them down to the main points with some images in order to really make this concept stick in my brain. So that's my insight. Who's next?
So for my portion, I chose to look at oppression versus liberation. And I think you'll see with what Maggie just said, this all sort of connects together. It's a lot of overlap, but so I think you'll see that. But yeah, I tried to look at what he viewed as being oppressive, or the oppressors, how he'd sort of defined those, versus what he was talking about with liberation or the liberators. Right? So first, oppressors seek to minimize the creative thinking power of the population. Right? They don't want to promote critical thinking, like with that bank deposit knowledge. They just want to give you the information. They don't want you to come up with it on your own. And this is going to lead into someone else's, but they try to change the oppressed people's consciousness rather than the oppressive situation, right? They don't want things to change, even though they're bad. They want to make the people that are oppressed okay with it, right? Just to keep the status quo. Right?
Not cool, you guys.
Yeah. So oppression views the word as static or dead. I think the word that they used was necrophilic in the text, which was
I had to look that up.
Yeah, which was new for me too. So what they basically talking about was that people could only relate to their possessions, right? If they didn't have something, then they didn't really relate to it. Which meant that threatening someone's possession, taking away someone's possession, is akin to threatening that person himself. And then on the other side of things, I think a big point here was that liberation is a praxis, right? We're not going to, it's not another version of deposits, right? You can't teach liberation in the same way as the banking style. I think Einstein, right, said we can't solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So I think it's another example of that. It promotes creativity and growth through problem solving, like you were talking about, changing the system, education, more critical thinking. And liberating educators must view themselves as partners of the students, right? Where one person knows everything, the other person doesn't know anything. Instead, change that to the teacher and the student are both learning and teaching each other. And finally, liberation views the word as biophilic, like focusing on life, where knowledge and experience beats out memorization and possession.
Yes, excellent.
I hope you're now seeing why using a reading strategy was useful for this.
We would have never made it out alive.
I'm going to bring it home with a third concept, which is this fuzzy concept around consciousness and what he means around cognition. So for the banking model of education, only the teachers are cognitive. And the cognitive process is the creative process of making a lesson plan, preparing it, reciting it to students, and students passively receive it. in order for students to develop consciousness, they need to also be cognitive rather than passive receivers of knowledge. And so this happens in the problem posing education, where they're involved in dialogue, in determining what the education is, what the questions are, and where the information goes. It's open-ended. You can't design a lesson plan around a set of core learning outcomes that are concrete in a mastery sort of way. This cognition through dialogues allows humans to be conscious of the ways that the world has shaped them, their role within the world, and their ability to in turn shape it. So this is the most important part around what is the purpose of the problem posing education, is to understand yourself in relation to the world, how other humans have created the world before you, how you fit into it, and your ability to transform. So being conscious of this dynamic nature of the world is a process. And you learn that it's not static. It's not, as Matt was talking about earlier, it's not fixed, it's not dead. So the banking model urges us to see the systems in our world as static. So systems of oppression like racism, capitalism, sexism, whatever, are as natural as the law of gravity. They are fixed. You can't change them. And so the point is to understand the rules and then learn the rules and apply the rules over and over. They can't be changed. Whereas a problem posing education model of education allows us to see these as creations of human beings determined through our relationships with each other that we can change by changing the ways that we relate to each other, starting with teacher and student.
Yes, I love it.
So consciousness leads to a sense of control or empowerment for humans. And when humans don't have control over the decisions that impact their lives, this is a form of violence and alienation. And to be human is to understand yourself in the world and to act on it, to be able to have power and to create it anew. And to transform the world based on your consciousness is the whole point of being human. So this is heady, important stuff for Freire. And it needs to be done in collaboration with others. This is solidarity. And when people prevent other people from being able to act on their world through disempowerment, it's a form of violence and impedes liberation for both the oppressed, which I think is obvious, but more importantly for the oppressor. The teachers also suffer in this model and aren't able to realize their ability to be fully human through this more oppressive top-down model of education. So liberation is a collective process. And a quote just from the text, and this is helpful maybe in using the strategy, is to jot some direct quotes down, is a deepened consciousness of their situation leads people to apprehend that a situation as an historical reality susceptible to transformation.
So I guess that's...
Wait, did we skip a slide?
Oh.
Yeah, here we go. There it is. So step 5 is review. So this is the collective process at the end. And this is where you practice recalling and self-assessing your own understanding. Look at the notes that you jotted down, look at the quotes you wrote down, pay extra attention to the parts that you found difficult, and link this information to your own experiences. So this step reinforces future reading and learning. It will tie what you've learned from the reading into the greater context of what you know. So this is really how to absorb the learning. And another thing that you can do in this stage is to look back at the questions that you wrote during the questioning stage and see if you answered them. That's always kind of fun. So let's see if we answered ours. Okay, so our first one, how is banking related to education? Anybody? Anybody?
Well, it was the metaphor, right? The knowledge that the teacher gives them just goes right into the student's head. And they're supposed to memorize it as a deposit. So, yeah.
Excellent, got that one. Who is Paulo Freire? What informs his perspective? Did we get that?
We did not get that from this reading, nor did we get a methodology.
Yeah, so that's important to notice. If your questions don't get answered and you use the reading strategy, that just means you need additional research to answer your questions. Now, you might come up with questions that aren't actually addressed in the reading, and that's just good to know. In this model, what is the bank in education and what is the currency? Anybody?
Well, the bank is the poor children's minds, and the currency is what the teacher is giving them, forcing them to remember.
Yes, really good. So we got that one. Okay, so this one is based on prior knowledge because we've learned what the factory model of education is. So how is the banking concept of education related to the factory concept of education? Did we get that?
He doesn't spell this out, I think,
Mm-mm.
super clearly, but you could probably infer some connections.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think I would infer that it's like you're churning all kids through the same curriculum. You're treating every pupil as like a uniform concept. It kind of has that coldness and that sameness. They both have that spirit.
Right. But if you were doing something comparing these two, you would probably have another reading on factory education itself. So
another reason for additional research.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So we wanted to know, will this be a critique or a praise of the current model of education?
This is a critique.
This is a pretty fierce critique.
The foundational text of
yeah, this is a passionate critique. Okay, is this a problem for everyone or just the oppressed? Did we learn that?
It's bad for everyone, folks. Even the teachers lose, no matter if they're in power.
Yeah, it really is. He breaks down how this keeps people oppressed, and then he breaks down how even the people with power lose a certain amount of their humanness and their ability to be conscious. Okay, why does the banking model exist? Did we learn that?
Well, he says why it, not how it came about maybe, but why the oppressors want to keep everybody in control. So that's why it still exists.
Yes, the old lust for power. You've heard of it before. Yeah. Okay, and what about solutions? What solutions did we retain from the reading?
I think this is all around like liberation, consciousness, another way of doing things, another way to be human.
Yes, focusing on dialogue, doing critical thinking. So we got some suggestions on solutions, even though, he didn't necessarily lay out a full methodology. He dropped some seeds. Yes, guys, I think we proved that we read it and we understood it.
Yeah, well, good. Nice going. So I just want to talk about some of the main takeaways that we all sort of got from this, using this strategy. Sorry. Just start sort of step by step. I mean, surveying, gives you sort of the big picture of what you think you're going to learn about. But I think it's also should be good to mention, if you're not doing this because your professor assigned you, if you're doing it for your research, you may in the survey phase realize like, oh, maybe I don't need to read this. This is not really pertaining to my topic. So just something to think about. Question phase. This really helps you put the background knowledge and the survey phase together. Helps you focus on the reading, maybe will improve your interest in reading it. It also like sets up the guiding read-it stage that you're going to go on to. So, have a guide while you're reading. You got to read it, but at least you're actively reading. You got to do it though. Reciting. This is just another way of checking your understanding. Someone who's good at using reciting or good at reciting this phase will have to use some good metacognition. Be very self-aware. Like, do I really understand this? That's also another strategy that helps you interact with the text. And then review. It's going to help you sort of remember the information over a long term, and also be able to put it into context with your other things you're reading as well. And you could come back to it and pretty easily put it into context that way. And it'd be very helpful if you need to use that for some assignment or test later down the road. In terms of when SQ3R is most beneficial, just rolls off the tongue. I think it's most beneficial, like nonfiction texts, like the one we read, the very dense things, a lot of information that will need to be sort of pulled out and remembered for later use. I saw a lot of people not recommending it necessarily for math textbooks because they're focused on, formulaic sort of problem solving. And it might just be better to problem solve as you go about that. Beginner second language textbooks, I heard, because it's a lot of vocab mostly. And maybe novels. They might benefit from a better approach. Novels, maybe you're trying to get a bigger picture, not just, pull every little fact out of them if you can. So, yeah. So, it's up to you. What do you think? If you used it before, do you think it'll work on this text?
Nice.
And how can it be differentiated for learners? In the classroom, we should probably model using this strategy for the students. Especially when they're first learning this strategy, graphic organizers can help, like we make sure they go step by step, like, oh, what section headings did you see? What bold points did you see, right? And go down questions. Do you have any questions? You could scaffold this as much as you want, right? You can give an example question and then help them generate their own. And especially, students that are not comfortable doing this on their own yet can use group work or pair work to practice this strategy, right? Have a dialogue with their classmates and see if they can come up with some ideas together before trying it on their own. And show maybe some videos outlining the strategy and give some tips to the students. We actually have, I think, 1 or 2 videos of giving some tips, and also a video of the classroom usage. A teacher in middle school, I believe, actually teaching this strategy to her students, which I think will be linked in the handout. If you want to take a look there.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for going on this journey with us. I hope that you learned a new reading strategy that you can apply to your classrooms, as well as some ideas about this really awesome text. I think that we would all recommend it. It's deep. You're going to need a strategy to get through it, but it'll be worth it in the end. It gives a lot of insight into your role as a teacher. So that's all we've got. Thank you guys so much. Goodbye.
Yes.